Sticky bomb traps are probably the easiest way to consistently get kills in casual Team Fortress 2. In a vacuum, traps are a simple concept. Place a few sticky bombs down, and the poor soul who turns the corner next gets blown to smithereens. In reality, it is a bit more complicated. Many players struggle to seamlessly implement sticky traps into their gameplay. Where to put the trap, how many bombs to place, why some spots work and some don't, and when to give up and just sticky spam are all difficult questions to answer. In fact, the main downside to sticky traps is that you are missing out on sticky spamming. When you put down a trap, you are effectively preventing yourself from using stickies until you either get a kill with a trap or get impatient and start spamming. I already made an in-depth video about sticky spam, so I'll refrain from talking about it too much here. Just remember that spam is an essential part of your kit, and that it is mutually exclusive with sticky traps. Well, unless you are using the Scottish resistance, but more on that item later. Anyways, not all sticky traps serve the same purpose. For example, traps can be placed out in the open to deter the enemy instead of outright killing them. I usually refer to this minefield-esque trap as carpeting because of how the stickies are spread out. Technically speaking, a single sticky bomb could be considered a trap, and it can be used as one in combat to influence your opponents. I refer to this as zoning, and I discussed it in depth in the aforementioned sticky spam video. The point I'm trying to make here is what is and is not considered to be a trap is pretty ambiguous due to the nature of sticky bombs. For the sake of brevity, I will only be covering sticky traps that fall into the category of carpet or pick traps. Before I get any further, let me just rehash a few basics. As you probably already know, right-clicking with the sticky bomb launcher will detonate all active sticky bombs. A sticky will not detonate if it was fired less than 0.7 seconds ago. This is known as the arm period, and in the context of a sticky trap, it is largely irrelevant. If you have 8 stickies placed and you shoot a 9th, the first bomb you fired will explode. This can be useful in some niche cases, but I will get to that later. Detonating isn't the only way to get rid of sticky bombs. They can be essentially deleted by your opponent without actually exploding in a number of ways. Shooting a sticky with any hit scan weapon will clear it, as well as Pyro's detonator, his scorch shot, the demo's quickie bomb launcher, and the Scottish resistance. Melee weapons work too, although I wouldn't recommend clearing a trap this way for obvious reasons. Explosives such as rockets don't delete sticky bombs, but they do move them. Air Blast also simply pushes sticky bombs. Just be careful to not grief your team accidentally by trying to clear a trap. The sticky bomb launcher also has a hidden damage ramp-up stat that is important in the context of sticky traps. Sticky bombs suffer from damage falloff for the first 5 seconds after they are fired. After this 5-second period, sticky bombs will deal their base damage regardless of the distance between them and the demo who placed them. It is important to note that this 5-second period only affects damage falloff and not explosive falloff. This means that sticky bombs will deal more damage the closer they are to their target upon detonation. This information is extremely important in the context of sticky traps because it can be the difference between securing a kill or missing out. Ideally, you will want the sticky bombs to be as close to the target as possible as you detonate them, but the trade-off is that usually the sticky bombs are more visible this way. Using the classic sticky bomb trap over a doorway as an example, if the stickies are placed as low as possible, they will be visible to the player before they are even close to walking through the door. Conversely, if they are placed super far above the door, they will be much harder to see, but they will also do much less damage because the center of the explosion is further away from the victim. I find that all of this essentially means that in most cases there is an inverse relationship between a trap's visibility and its lethality. Oftentimes, a sticky trap that is almost completely hidden is also almost entirely useless because the window in which it is actually able to damage enemies is too small for a human to react in time and detonate. On the flip side, a sticky trap that is on the ground will be incredibly lethal should a player blunder into it, but it is going to be very easy to see and avoid. That being said, a sticky trap does not necessarily have to get a kill to provide value to you and your team. Generally speaking, nobody wants to be around explosives that can be detonated at any time by some drunk guy, and TF2 is no different. You can use traps to slow down or deny your opponents from going somewhere. A good example is if you are defending on payload. If the card is close to being capped, you can lay down a carpet of stickies to prevent the blue team from touching it. If blue wants to stop the cart from rolling back, they have to spend time clearing your trap or alternatively risk being blown up. Carpet traps are useful outside of the objective too. For example, you can use a trap to buy yourself time to retreat. Placing a sticky or two at your feet when you are backing up for a health pack can be a lifesaver since your opponent can't safely push you through the stickies. Another common scenario is carpeting a bunch of stickies on a choke point. The other team has to either go find a flank route or take the time to disarm your minefield. Do note that you can actively retrap these carpets as people try to clear them to buy you and your team even more time. The other situation I commonly find myself placing down a carpet of bombs is during the other team's Uber. Placing a minefield behind the Uber prevents the other team from easily taking the space that their combo is attempting to create while simultaneously trapping the Ubered players in. Most of the time, the other team realizes that they are in too deep and tries to back up right into your trap. Just be careful to not get caught out by the Uber when you are doing this. Slowing down the other team or punishing out of position players are the two main uses I have found for carpet traps. The only other time I personally use a visible trap is when I am trying to funnel players into a pick trap. Most players will just avoid a clump of stickies they can just go around, so you can hide a trap where the player will be influenced to go to avoid the first trap. I find myself using this strategy to use a distraction trap to mind control my opponents into not taking a corner wide so they fall for the real trap. While this is a useful tool to have in your arsenal, it is a pretty niche strategy that I rarely use. I find that it is usually relatively easy to get kills with pick traps without spending additional ammo on a carpet. Pick traps are meant to get a kill, so unlike a carpet, they should be at least somewhat hidden. As I mentioned earlier, a trap that is super well hidden is usually not very consistent. I tend to avoid these low success rate traps. If I'm going to go through the effort of placing a bunch of stickies down and then actively avoid sticky spamming to keep an eye on it, I want the trap to have a pretty high chance of actually achieving something. For that reason, I don't typically get too experimental with my traps and instead stick to the most effective ones. So what makes a trap effective? Well, I would consider there to be 3 requirements that must be met. As I already mentioned, the trap should be hidden from the victim, at least until it is too late. Secondly, the trap should be in a highly traveled area. Lastly, the trap should be safe to watch. All of these factors change depending on the game state. As a result, a fantastic trap in one situation can be useless in another. Let me start with visibility, since it is arguably the easiest concept. The main way to hide your stickies is with perspective. The classic trap above a doorway, or on a wall or floor lip works extremely well because the victim cannot see the sticky bombs until just before they are about to enter their range. The main drawback to traps that abuse perspective to remain mostly hidden is that they are directional. Depending on where the potential victim is approaching from, the sticky bombs may not be obscured. Traps work well on regular doorways, but even better on shutters. TF2 has tons of shutters that open automatically when somebody enters their range. You can place stickies on the floor right in front of the shutter and instantly detonate them the second you spot the shutter moving. This works extremely well since the trap is very hidden until it is too late. This may seem a bit overpowered, but the trap can be avoided by peeking the shutter very carefully, since if you open it from the corner of its player detection area, the trap may not deal damage. The player peeking can also bait out the detonation by jiggling in and out of the shutter's range, or outright clear the sticky bombs before the demo has a chance to react. The other way to hide a trap is to put it somewhere where the stickies literally cannot be seen or are very difficult to spot. On many maps, there are rocks, bushes, or other objects that do not have a hitbox. While these are technically better than traps that are hidden with perspective, some performance configs remove these objects so they aren't entirely reliable. Fortunately, there are spots that use both perspective and object clipping in tandem. One example is probably my favorite pick trap in the game, not only because of how reliably it gets kills, but also because it is extremely versatile. You can put a trap right here in front of the payload, and unless the stickies are cleared before the cart is pushed up, the bombs are basically invisible and impossible to clear. They still somehow damage anybody nearby because of some source spaghetti I don't understand. Sometimes this strategy won't be lethal for some reason, but it usually works. This trap also doesn't need to be actively watched, since you can use your objective indicator to know that there are people pushing the cart. There isn't much else to say about cart traps other than it works on pretty much all payload maps that don't have a custom cart. Both new and experienced players die to this trap with frightening consistency, so try this out in your games. One reason I believe this trap to be so effective is because it does a great job of checking the second box that makes a trap good. It should be in a well-traveled location. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you have a trap where nobody walks, you will be waiting a long time before someone blunders into it. The objective is always going to be a fantastic choice, not only because it will give you more kills, but also more meaningful kills that help your team manage the objective. Other than the objective, other good spots can be learned with time, but a general rule of thumb is that doors and choke points are typically a good bet. The final aspect of a good trap is how easy it is to watch. Again, using the example of my beloved cart trap, you don't even need to be staring at the trap to know when to detonate. Your HUD does the heavy lifting for you. Other than trapping right in front of the cart, you can also trap a capture point. If you expect to lose a point in payload, you can wait for the cart to be pushed to that point. Once it is captured, wait a second or two and detonate. This can often lead to multi-kills because a lot of players will pile on the cart right as it's about to cap to get extra capture points. In the context of other traps, you will need to keep it in your line of sight to know when to detonate. Usually in this situation, I sit back and I lob some pipe spam, or I place another trap and watch them both at the same time. This can get hairy after a while because depending on where you have your bombs, you could be risking your life to keep watching. Use your own discretion and don't be afraid to give up and move on. By the way, if you for some reason don't already have your field of view set to maximum, you should set it to 90 by typing FOV_desired 90 into your developer console. Not only will this make watching a trap in your peripheral vision easier, but it will also help you avoid dying to traps. I know for a fact that there are still people out there who use 70 FOV. Please do yourself a favor and make the switch. As you have probably noticed in my gameplay, I tend to use 3 to 4 stickies per trap. The reason I don't often use any more or less is because 3 or 4 is usually enough to one-shot whoever bumbles into the trap. 5 is typically overkill, and 2 bombs can still get a pick on light classes, but it won't take out a healthier target. There are times where I think 5 bombs is the ideal number, and other times when 2 is fine. I'll use 5 stickies in a trap if I expect a buffed heavy to be peeking, which is mostly relevant when I am spawn camping. In this context, using an extra bomb or 2 is worth the ammo in order to guarantee that the trap will be lethal, because if it is not, the victim can just resupply and essentially lose nothing. When spawn camping, I often try to stand very close to my sticky trap because I will usually have to detonate before the stickies have been out for long enough to ignore damage falloff. Again, this just helps guarantee the kill, but it is also riskier. Since you can only have 8 sticky bombs active with stock, I use a 2-bomb trap at the start of a payload round if I want to have 3 traps, resulting in a 3-3-2 spread. Alternatively, 4 and 4 is a decent option, or even 2-2-2-2. If you're lucky enough to have a crits medic, you can even have 8 separate traps that are all lethal. On occasion, it is best to just give up and start to sticky spam because you can't always perfectly predict where the other team is going to go. Don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy and spend minutes on end watching your trap. Not only is this boring, but it is also less impactful than moving on to greener pastures. Alright, now that you know the makings of a good trap, I want to talk about when to apply them to your gameplay. As with many things, this is a difficult question to answer. In fact, I don't believe there is an objectively correct answer because different things work for different people and different playstyles. Keep in mind that all of my advice on this channel is just what works for me. Anyways, the first bit of theory is that the best sticky trap is going to be the most aggressive one you can safely place down and watch. The reasoning for this is that you can always place a trap that is less far up at any time, but once the other team takes some space, you can no longer get an aggressive trap placed. The best demonstration of this is at the start of the round on an attack defend or payload map. I'll use upward as the example because who doesn't love upward? If you are defending, you have a ton of good sticky traps on upward first. There are lots of rocks and bushes with no clipping, as well as doorways, pillars, and lips that have good perspective for hiding your stickies. You only have 8 bombs, so if you don't have crits, you can realistically put down 2 to 3 lethal traps since it usually takes 3 bombs to secure a kill. It doesn't take a mathematician to tell you that with 24 or so good trap locations and only 3 traps to actually place, you have a dizzying amount of choices. I can tell you that in my upward games, I only use around 3 of these configurations, and it's because I'm applying the put your traps as aggressive as reasonably possible rule to my gameplay. I almost always trap either the spawn doors, the cart, or the rocks on the right in pregame because once the spawn gates open, it is no longer safe for me to replace those traps because of sniper sightlines. Once I detonate my initial wave of traps, I am able to replace traps in the other strong locations that are closer to where my team's hold is set up. You don't have to get the aggro traps down, but if you choose to start the round with the passive traps, you are missing out on the possibility of getting a frag or two with the forward traps because you end up with the passive traps either way. Another reason that I believe this aggressive traps first mentality is a bit ethereal, but forward traps tend to get detonated sooner than passive traps, which just means that you can spend more time sticky spamming, which usually means more frags in the long run. This seems logical and easy to follow, but it can be difficult to gauge when it is safe to put a greedy forward trap down. This just comes down to game sense. You have to just play to get a grasp on this. The second theory point I would like to bring up is map control. Both pick traps and carpet traps are immensely useful at holding on to map control, which is essential to winning games. If you notice that the other team is mostly dead, it is a prime opportunity to get a trap setup where you think their spawn wave will be rolling out. Some players might consider this next advice to be unethical, but I personally have no issues with it. Spawn camping is a really powerful use for your traps. The reason I don't have a problem with spawn camping is because the other team's own mistakes led up to them getting camped. Also, well-designed maps have multiple spawn doorways, which, when combined with jiggle peeking, the short circuit, and other methods of clearing traps, means that breaking out of a spawn camp is fairly easy. In fact, I would argue that on some points, spawn camping is basically a necessity to win because the defending team has such a huge advantage. Looking at you, Upward Last. Alright, the last bit of sticky trap theory I want to discuss is something that I have already hinted at in this video. The opportunity cost of committing to a sticky trap is the ability to sticky spam. Because detonating will detonate all active sticky bombs, you can't simultaneously sticky spam and keep a trap with the stock sticky bomb launcher or the quickie bomb launcher. I suppose it wouldn't be a proper video about sticky traps unless I mentioned the Scottish resistance. You can technically use the Scottish resistance in this fashion, but it is basically impossible to effectively spam with this thing because of the longer arm timer. The whole point of sticky spam is to deal damage, and with a 1.72 second arm period, you're going to have a hard time actually hitting anything. Sure, with the Scottish resistance you are able to maintain multiple traps, which can lead to some pretty sick multi-kills, but this ability is just not worth losing out on sticky spam if you're trying to play optimally. I would say that sticky traps only make up around 20% of my frags with the sticky bomb launcher. The other 80% of the time, I'm using it to spam. Is it worth losing 80% of the sticky bomb launcher's damage potential in order to marginally improve the remaining 20%? Probably not. Also, an argument could be made that this thing isn't even as good as traps as stock because, well, aiming at the bombs you want to blow up is kind of clunky. So I guess the takeaway is use the Scottish resistance if you want, but I'll stick to stock mostly because it just fits my aggressive playstyle much better. I believe that traps become stronger the less players there are in a server because a single frag in 6v6 is much more impactful than the same kill in a 12v12. Similarly, sticky spam is stronger the more players there are in the server because you have more potential to deal area of effect damage. Alright, moving on to some more esoteric information that is still quite useful. As a demo, you have a lot of room to get creative with your traps. For example, in this clip, I give the other team a false sense of security with this first trap, only to have a second trap that gets this Pyro. Most of the time, you are going to want to detonate all your stickies at once. If you have 8 crit stickies placed, you can detonate them one at a time by shooting a 9th bomb. This can be somewhat useful if you want to deny a single door for a long time by putting 8 traps over the door. There are probably more spots like this throughout the Badlands, so let us know in the comments if you are aware of more, but the only one that I know about is this grate in Wishbone on steel. This material does not block explosions, so you can put a trap here that is lethal even through the floor. Alright, sorry if I sound terrible since I'm adding this in post, while a bit under the weather, but I almost forgot to mention this spot on Upward. This trap is pretty consistent for getting regular kills, but it also will send Ubered players flying off the cliff if you get a good timing. Don't forget to stay active when you are watching a trap. In some cases, it makes sense to stand still and stare, but in the majority of situations, spamming pipes and keeping your head on a swivel is ideal.
That's all I was doing.
They did to us and upward.
I'm going out. I don't care about stickies.
Oh,
Maybe
Demo
he's